Hello everyone, I'm KarboBalloon, and today we're going to talk about Mystical Ninja starring Goemon for the Nintendo 64. Yeah, right there. Got it. I was always quite fond of this game as a kid, and I was always curious to why no one talked about it considering how small the Nintendo 64's library is. I suppose it was overshadowed by the more popular games for the N64 like Banjo-Kazooie, The Legend of Zelda, and Donkey Kong 64. This is my first real visit to the game in over a decade, so let's see how well it's aged. The game starts off ordinarily enough, with a cutscene involving the two main casts being kicked out of a restaurant for public indecency, then a UFO invades Edo. At that point, the game drops you off in a room with the knowledge of what just happened in the first cutscene. No tutorial, no nothing. So let's take a look at the controls. A jumps, B attacks, Z, C down? Okay. Guess that changed characters. C left changes weapons. Alright, this is pretty simple. Off we go! Basically, you wander around for a while until you come across the entrance to Edo Castle, which you can't go into because you don't have the chain pipe. This requires you to go all the way to the top of Mount Fuji to talk to a smith who gives you the pipe. Now that you've been given the chain pipe, you can head back to Edo Castle. The chain pipe, on top of being a ranged weapon, is used to pull you to the star blocks, which allows you to enter the first dungeon. Which brings me to one of my first complaints. You will realize early on that there's no camera controls, so lining up these shots can be a pain. In the first dungeon, sometimes you'll have to jump and use the pipe in midair to get across a gap, and doing this when the camera isn't directly behind the player can be a problem. The only way to move the camera is to face the direction you want the camera to face and wait for it to pan around. The frustration can increase when the camera will stop turning if an object or a wall gets in the way, which requires a bit of finesse. The whole dungeon setup will feel extremely familiar a few minutes in. Locked doors, keys, items that give map and reveal boss locations. Yeah, it's pretty much Legend of Zelda. Though, it does technically predate Ocarina of Time by almost a year, so technically it's really the first Zelda-esque 3D game. The first dungeon plays out in a pretty linear fashion and works pretty well for showing the ropes of how dungeons work. The first boss is almost simple to a fault. It's just some rotating statue that breathes fire and shoots lasers from his neck. But he takes like a million hits. It's super easy to nail down, so after breaking him 3 times, you're ready for the boss fight to end, but it just keeps going. One good thing is, even though the camera in the game is a pain, they design around that limitation with these fights by focusing the camera on the boss, but rotating based on the player movements. This is really nice since it keeps the focus on where it really matters while not having to worry that much about wrestling with the camera. Then there's a short cutscene where you get the super pass from the Emperor, or some guy, and you're free to wander around until you find the guards who let you out of the city to Musashi. Keep following the path until KABOOM! A building randomly blows up and this spinning dude shows up again.
Ooh.
Excuse me?
Ooh.
What was that?
Ooh.
Okay. He says he's gonna crush you with a giant robot, but... After a slick anime entry, you get to control Impact while pretty much destroying most of Japan. After this short bit, you get your first Impact fight. There isn't anything tutorial-like for these battles, so you're pretty much left to figure out how things work on your own. My first time at this fight, the only way I figured to hurt him was to shoot the coins, but that only does 5 damage. It took me a while to figure out that you have to tap A repeatedly after hitting with the chain pipe to reel him in for a combo punch. There are also special moves you can do as Impact, but those require Street Fighter-like inputs, and the game doesn't tell you about them, so you have to really consult an online guide to figure out how to do them. The only one that I could pull off was the laser, which on top of looking really cool actually does quite a bit of damage. I quite like these battles. As far as unique things in the game go, these feel the best. It really creates a distinction between it and other adventure games. They certainly more than make up for the lackluster on-foot battles. They offer a decent challenge and the super moves are satisfying to pull off, the only downside being the game doesn't directly tell you they exist, and with them requiring complex button inputs, the chances of you figuring them out on your own is pretty low. See that? That's the face of murder. Anyway, after you win the boss battle, you continue straight down the path and arrive at Zazen Town. Here you meet Yae, and she joins your party. As of now, she doesn't really have much of a use, her only attack is a sword, which pales in comparison to the chain pipe. At this point, the game establishes everything you'll be doing. Dungeons, getting power-ups, and new characters. Impact battles, exploration, and lastly, talking to everyone in sight. I haven't really mentioned this yet, but the game does very little in the ways of directly telling you what to do next. This sometimes leaves you running around not sure what direction to go or what you're even supposed to be doing. Luckily, the game designers knew this and dispersed snippets of information to all the NPCs in the game. While it does get kind of annoying that they could have done this in a better way, the lines of dialogue are actually pretty funny. You try leaving the town and the guard blocks your way, so you talk to this asshole and he wants you to collect a bunch of fish for him. Once you get all the fish, he gives you the Achilles heel, which you need to throw at the guard to get through. You do this with a short mini game, which is one of the few dispersed throughout Mystical Ninja. After you beat him, the game takes some artistic liberties with the term Achilles heel, and you get Sasuke. You can't use him now, so just forget about him. Next, it's down the road until you reach the shore. You then hop onto some weird machine that takes you on top of a dragon. After you kill the robot, the dragon drops you down, and he gives Yae a flute. The flute allows you to fast travel to previous locations you've been to on the map. It's really nice because it cuts back on the amount of time you need to backtrack, which you'll be doing plenty in this game. At the top of the mountain that you get dropped off at, there's a shrine, and if you throw a bunch of coins in there, it allows you to set your coins on fire. I don't know why it does, but it just does. Next, you need to go to the hot springs, but once you get there, you soon discover that you're too big to get through the entrance to the next dungeon. Someone at the local coffee shop says that there's a dwarf in Zazen town, so you need to head back there. Turns out that asshole from before is super small and tells you that you can shrink at the Golden Temple. Head to the Golden Temple as a Bisimaru to gain the shrink power. Now you can enter the second dungeon. The second dungeon is kinda ghost theme, and you get the camera there that reveals secrets. This dungeon brings up another example about the game being inconsistent in how it presents information to the player. In a game like Zelda, it is expected that most puzzles in a given dungeon will relate some way to the item received. While this remains true in Mystical Ninja, it also feels necessary to do things like... To make matters worse, before the boss it actually reveals that you need to use the camera to show its weak spot. It pretty much robs any satisfaction of solving the problem for yourself. It's not like it matters anyway, because the boss is super easy. After the boss is defeated, there'll be a short cutscene with some plot. I use the term loosely because I have no clue what is going on. All I do know is the main bad guy calls this dude Colon because it fits his personality. They leave and you're dropped out of the dungeon with the only goal of going to the Chugoku region. In Chugoku, you get Sasuke's first battery in the desert, and then you head on top of this random tree and use the camera to make the next battery appear. It's pretty cryptic, but I'm pretty sure an NPC somewhere divulges information. After you get Sasuke, you can use his bombs to knock down the wall leading to the third dungeon, the Festival Temple. This is the game's most challenging dungeon yet, but that's not saying too much. Festival Temple feels more maze-like, it requires a bit more backtracking compared to the first two, but like most dungeons, it doesn't have any puzzles. You basically search around until you find the key to open up each door and then find the item required to get through the rest of the dungeon. Most of the challenge in this game comes from the platforming, which is a little bit hindered due to the camera controls, but it still has its moments. Take this room for example. It is the hardest room in the dungeon, and it's based solely around platforming. The camera doesn't really get in the way either, and it's quite fun to actually traverse unless you miss a jump and fall all the way back to the bottom, which can be more frustrating than anything else. Outside the minor problems that only rear their ugly heads every so often, the real issue I have with Mystical Ninja is challenge. The game fails to prevent any sort of real difficulty that challenges any of the skills the player builds up over the course of the game. The closest thing this game has to difficulty is finding out where to go between dungeons, but that's solved simply by talking to everyone in sight, or endlessly wandering around until you find out where to go by chance. The only time I ever died throughout the whole playthrough was in the impact battles, but those play differently enough they don't really challenge the core skills the player builds up through the course of the game. Once again, there's a sign in front of the boss telling you the exact way to kill it. And while this boss doesn't actually have anything to do with the weapon acquired in the dungeon, it's probably the best on-foot battle in the game. Basically, you dodge the projectiles, but hit the red ones back. Every few hits he changes up the pattern, which the previous bosses didn't do. It's pretty simple, but it's also pretty fun. That and the music is pretty fucking awesome. After beating him, there's a short scene where we see an evil lady, and she says she's up to no good and has something to do with Kyushu. Off to Kyushu we go! Unfortunately, when we get there, it lifts off into space! To find out where to go next, we need to consult who's a naked guy with a bag on his head that sets you on the right track if you get lost. Tells you need to go north to visit a witch, but before you go, you need to get buff. So you head to Edo to visit a new gym and play a minigame that gives Goemon the ability to go Super Saiyan. This allows you to move a metal block out of your way to head to a new village. There you find out the path to the witch is blocked, and a nice NPC tells you that his brother is at the top of Mount Fuji and can upgrade your weapons. So you head all the way back to Mount Fuji to get the level 2 weapons and can now break the rock in the way. The witch summons the wise old man who tells you need all 4 miracle items to get the space where Kyushu is. Luckily, we already have 3. Only 1 left. Of course, we don't know where that is, so we're once again left without direction. Time to talk to everyone in town. You hear some rumors about how climbing a waterfall can turn you into a mermaid, and where said waterfall is. Complete the minigame there as Yae, and now you can turn into a mermaid, which is excellent for swimming in this lake where you find the next dungeon, which of course is a submarine filled with sushi and ramen. I like this dungeon. At least aesthetically I found it very amusing. I mean, who doesn't like a submarine filled with sushi? Once again you traverse the dungeon doing platforming and killing enemies. Nothing new. Yae gets a rocket here, but it doesn't really tie into any of the rooms. There's nothing super special about this dungeon, except one thing. When you get to the boss room, whoever runs says they lost a miracle item in Zazen Town and spins away. Whee! The sub begins a self-destruct countdown, but you summon Impact again. That's right, no footballs here. You get to fight another robot. This time you destroy the coast of Japan and fight a fish robot. This battle is fun, and he has 2 different phases. After having his health, he pulls you underwater and changes up his attacks a bit. By now you should have a better grasp on how to fight, and he goes down without too much of a challenge. Impact then drops you off outside. It's time to get that last piece, so it's off to Zazen Town once again. There we talk to the guard again, but he doesn't have the miracle item, but he tells you it's near Center Pond. There you meet a Kappa, and the only way he'll give it to you is if you buy him his favorite food. Turns out, it's cucumber. You can't buy it just yet, because the guy who sells it to you is too high out of reach. So as Sasuke, you do the super jump training so you can get up to the salesman. He sells the cucumber for the not-so-modest price of 800 Ryo. Now let's do some math. 1 Ryo is equivalent to around 300,000 modern yen, which is about $3,000. Multiply that by 800, and that's $2,400,000. That's one expensive cucumber. It's time to grind! Now that the grinding is done, you can go buy the cucumber and give it to the Kappa. There, miracle piece got. Time to go to space. This shrine launches you to space immediately starting the final dungeon, Glorious Musical Castle. The final dungeon is pretty well designed, while it suffers from the recurring lack of challenge, and by that I mean there are health items that heal you to full health literally everywhere. Look at this. The enemies only do half to 1 heart of damage at a time, and with items that you can buy at shops that prevent a certain amount of hits, plus items that act like fairies in Zelda, the chances of you dying here end up pretty low. What the dungeon does do is require you to use every single item or power you have found in the game. So for a final dungeon, it works. It's got some solid platforming, and it's decently long considering it's split into 2 parts. About halfway through, you come to a town where you can heal, not sure why you would need to, buy items, upgrade your weapons to level 3 so you can access the second half. The music here is pretty rad, just listen to it while I fail at platforming. There's some cool rooms like the spinning one, which are fun to play through. Overall, it's pretty solid. Then there's the boss. After you reach the final room, you listen to a long song by the main villains. Then you summon Impact for the final 2 fights of the game. The first boss is very reminiscent of Star Fox 64. The best weapon to use here are the coins because all the pieces of the ship stay far away from you. The different parts of the ship all use different attacks, and you need to take out all of them in order for the ship to die, a la Star Fox. After that fight, the final boss appears. He fights like a more standard Impact battle, and offers a good challenge. As far as final bosses go, he's really fun. He consistently darts about, making him hard to hit, so you really have to time your strikes if you want to take him down. He marks the only time I've died in the playthrough. After beating him, Kyushu returns back to the Earth, then our heroes arrive in a town with a swarm of girls heading right for them. But these girls are actually really upset with them because they enjoyed the show the Peach Mountain Shoguns put on. Guess they didn't know about the kidnapping, both personal and territorial. That's it. That's the whole game. Overall, I think it's a very solid game for the Nintendo 64 library. Despite its camera issues, cryptic directions, and lack of difficulty overall, none of that really detracts too much from the overall game experience. On the other side, core gameplay feels good. Running, jumping, and attacking all feel really responsive and continually engage the player. The graphics are crisp and colorful, the soundtrack is upbeat and catchy, adding quirky dialogue and monsters, and you've got a wonderful, strange world to explore. The dungeons might not be as well done as other games, but that shouldn't make you shy away from this lesser-known gem.